The air in my parents' living room was thick, heavy with an expectation I couldn't quite place. I sat on the edge of the floral sofa, knees pressed together, eyes scanning the circle of familiar faces. My brother Silas leaned back with his arms crossed. Aunt Katrina clutched her tea like it was a shield, and my cousin Janelle toyed with her phone, waiting for the show to start. At the center, my mother Lorraine sat upright, hands folded as if she were chairing a board meeting. She cleared her throat, the signal that everyone should listen. "You're family now," she said, her voice sharp and decisive. "Pay your share." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. Then my father, Marlon, chimed in, nodding gravely. "Half your salary. Alara, that's how we've always done it. The one who earns the most contributes to the family fund." I blinked, trying to keep my face neutral. Half my salary I worked long nights analyzing spreadsheets, surviving on caffeine and deadlines. And now they wanted me to hand over half my paycheck as if it were a tithe. Lorraine's gaze locked on mine. "It's tradition. Honey, we take care of each other." My stomach tightened. Tradition. I remembered being 22, covering Silas's tuition when his scholarships fell short, paying Aunt Katrina's medical bills, picking up the grocery tab more times than I could count. But this was different. This wasn't help. It was a demand. Silas shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't speak. Janelle smirked. My father's jaw stayed firm, and my mother, always the conductor, waited for me to obey. I leaned back, letting a slow smile spread across my face. "Then you won't mind if I—" My words hung in the air, and for the first time, their smug certainty flickered. I held on to that flicker, already knowing it would carry me into the storm that was about to follow. Their demand echoed in my ears long after I left that living room. Half my salary, spoken as if it were as natural as passing the salt at dinner. I drove home with my jaw clenched, and somewhere between the stoplights and the silence of my apartment, the memories began to surface. I was 20 when I first took on the role no one named but everyone relied on. I juggled classes and a part-time job at the campus library, then moved to full-time shifts in data entry to cover my tuition. When Silas's scholarship fell short, I wrote the check without hesitation. "You're the dependable one," my parents had said with pride, their voices warm as if they'd given me an award. Later, when Aunt Katrina's health insurance denied her a critical treatment, it was my savings that bridged the gap. She called me her angel, but I noticed how quickly gratitude softened into expectation. The next time a bill came, she didn't ask if I could help. She asked how much I could give. Even Janelle had benefited. When her car broke down in college, I co-signed the loan for a replacement. She promised to keep up with the payments, but within 6 months, the burden slid onto my shoulders. Each time I stepped in, I told myself this was temporary, that one day the balance would even out, but it never did. The more I gave, the more they shaped me into the reliable one, the backbone, the wallet. I mistook their praise for love when it was really grooming. They wanted me steady so they could stay unsteady. Sitting at my desk now, staring at the glow of yet another spreadsheet, the truth cut deeper than any demand at a family meeting. They had been building this moment for years, brick by brick, until asking for half my salary felt like the natural conclusion. And for the first time, I saw exactly how far they were willing to go. When I walked back into my parents' house the following week, the same faces gathered as if nothing had been settled. Lorraine perched in her chair, fingers laced together like she was presiding over some sacred ritual. Marlon cleared his throat, his deep voice filling the room. Everyone gives according to ability. That's how this family has always worked. The words landed heavy, but I noticed how no one else looked particularly weighed down. Silas shifted in his seat, avoiding my eyes. "I don't earn enough," he mumbled, a rehearsed line I'd heard too many times. Aunt Katrina, whose bills I'd once paid, lowered her gaze to the rug, as if the pattern suddenly fascinated her. She didn't speak, but silence was its own answer. Then Janelle leaned forward, her smile sharp and careless. "Come on. Ilara makes enough for all of us." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was cruel. It told me they had already decided I was the solution, not a member of the problem. I folded my arms, forcing my voice steady. "So you all contribute half?" "Too right." The silence that followed was colder than winter air. Silas scratched at the back of his neck. Katrina coughed. Marlon stiffened, his jaw tightening. Lorraine didn't flinch, her eyes drilling into mine as if daring me to keep pressing. That was my answer. They weren't united in sacrifice. They were united in expectation my sacrifice. Their gain. The family fund wasn't tradition. It was a carefully woven net designed to catch me and no one else. I let the pause linger, my smirk barely contained. Their unity was only a mask, and I had just pulled at the seam. But if I'd torn a small hole, I knew I'd have to be ready for what would spill through it. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and let the words slide out as if they were casual. If half my salary belongs to the family, then maybe I'll just quit my job altogether. No salary, no problem. The reaction was instant. Shock rippled across the room like a gust of cold wind. Aunt Katrina's teacup rattled in its saucer. Janelle blinked, her smirk faltering. Even Marlon's steady posture cracked, his shoulders sinking as though the foundation had been shaken. But it was Lorraine who snapped first. Her voice sliced through the silence. "You wouldn't dare." I met her gaze. "Wouldn't I, if the money isn't mine? Why bother working myself to exhaustion for everyone else's comfort?" Her lips tightened, but I didn't wait for her reply. I stood, smoothed my coat, and walked to the door. My heels clicked against the hardwood, each step louder than the last. Not a single person stopped me, though I felt their eyes burn into my back. The night air hit me as I stepped onto the porch, cool and sharp against my flushed cheeks. For a moment, I thought I'd escaped alone until footsteps followed. "Ilara," Silas called softly. I turned to see him standing in the doorway, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked smaller than I remembered, like the confident younger brother I once believed in had shrunk under years of excuses. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice uneven. "I didn't want it to go that far. Mom, Dad, they just what I cut him off. Decided my hard work was their inheritance." He winced but didn't argue. His apology hung between us, fragile, uncertain. For the first time, I wondered if one of them might finally see the machine for what it was, a system built on my back, running only because I let it. I didn't answer him. Instead, I walked down the steps and into the night, leaving him standing in the doorway with words he couldn't take back. As I drove away, the glow of the house shrinking in my rearview mirror, my phone lit up with the first of many messages that would follow. By the next morning, my phone had become a weapon turned against me. The first text arrived before sunrise. "We raised you. The least you can do is give back." I silenced the screen and tried to focus on my coffee, but another buzz followed, then another. By noon, I had 12 missed calls and a string of voicemails, each more desperate than the last. Lorraine's voice dominated them all, sharp and commanding. "Don't embarrass this family. You'll regret this if you keep acting selfish." My father's tone was steadier, but it cut just the same. "Don't forget. Ilara, we can cut you off if you walk away." Even Janelle chimed in with a mocking text. "Hope that big paycheck keeps you warm when you've got no family left." I started saving everything, screenshots of texts, recordings of voicemails, even the emails that carried thinly veiled threats. Each one I labeled, archived, tucked into a folder on my computer. A part of me hated the cold efficiency of it, but another part knew it was the only shield I had. At work, I tried to bury myself in data reports, but Cassian noticed the tightness in my shoulders. He lingered by my desk after our meeting, lowering his voice. "You look like hell. What's going on?" I debated brushing it off, but something in his steady gaze told me he wouldn't accept half an answer. So I told him maybe not every detail, but enough for him to understand why my phone buzzed like a hive I couldn't escape. His jaw clenched. "Ilara, that's not family. That's predation. You need to protect yourself. Lock down your accounts. Double-check your credit. Make sure no one slipped their name next to yours." The thought sent a chill through me. I'd been so focused on the emotional blows that I hadn't considered the practical ones: bank accounts, property records, all the invisible threads that tied my hard work to their reach. That evening, instead of going home, I drove to the bank. I changed my login credentials, added security alerts, and asked to flag any unusual activity. When I left, the autumn air felt crisper, cleaner, as if I'd taken one small step back toward control. But the messages didn't stop. If anything, they grew sharper, more frantic, more coordinated, like a pack circling prey. And late one night, when the buzzing finally went silent, I realized the quiet wasn't relief. It was the warning before the next strike. The call came in the middle of my lunch break. I almost ignored the unknown number, but something in my gut told me to answer. "Miss Whitcomb, this is Sandra from First Asheville Bank. We've flagged an unusual attempt to withdraw $4,500 from your account. Did you authorize this transaction?" My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "No, absolutely not." Sandra hesitated, then continued carefully. "It looks like someone tried to link your paycheck deposit to a secondary account. The request was denied, but the attempt was made using your social security number." The words felt like ice water down my spine. Only a handful of people had ever seen my SSN, and my father was one of them. By the time I hung up, my pulse was racing. I opened my banking app, scrolling through the details until I saw the account name tied to the failed request. Whitcomb Family Fund. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my phone. They hadn't even bothered to hide it. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by paperwork, bank statements, tax forms, pay stubs, every document that proved my life was mine and mine alone. Outrage coursed through me, hot and blinding, but beneath it was something colder, clearer. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was fraud. I filed a fraud alert with the bank, locking my credit and demanding every safeguard they could provide. Then I pulled up Cassian's number and asked him to recommend a lawyer. By the next morning, I was sitting across from a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tone. "What they did is criminal," she said flatly after scanning my notes. "Trying to reroute your paycheck without permission, that's identity theft. And if you have proof it was your father, that's even stronger." I nodded, throat tight. Proof. The word hit hard, because proof meant no more illusions. No more pretending this was just family pressure. It meant I had to decide whether to treat my family as loved ones or as criminals. And as I left her office, clutching a folder of forms and legal terms, I knew the choice was already made. I drove to my parents' house with the folder on the passenger seat, my fingers tight around the steering wheel. Every mile felt heavier, but I knew if I didn't confront them now, I'd carry the weight of silence forever. They were all there again, gathered like they had been before, as if these meetings had become some twisted tradition. Lorraine sat in her usual spot, regal and unyielding, while Marlin leaned back like a man who had already won the argument. I laid the papers on the coffee table. The bank called me. Someone tried to reroute my paycheck. They used my social security number. The account was labeled Whitcomb Family Fund. Care to explain? Lorraine didn't flinch. She glanced at the documents, then looked back at me with a cool smile. "We're family, Ilara. It's not stealing if it's ours." The room tilted for a moment. I waited for anyone to correct her, but the silence pressed in thick. Silas lowered his head, shame burning on his face. Janelle gave a nervous laugh, twirling her phone like this was some awkward joke that would pass. I looked from one to the other. You've taken my help before. My money. My time. And I kept giving, thinking it was love, thinking it was duty. But this is fraud. And I won't play along. Marlon shifted, his voice low. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I snapped the folder shut. No. You made it harder the moment you decided I was the provider instead of the daughter. That role is finished. I don't owe you half my salary, or any part of my life. The illusion cracked in that moment, the careful mask they'd worn for years slipping away. Lorraine's smile tightened, brittle as glass. I stood and walked toward the door, and not a single person moved to stop me. Outside, the cold air felt sharper than before, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they struck back in a different way. 3 days passed in uneasy quiet before the envelope arrived. It was slipped under my apartment door, thick paper inside. My name typed neatly on the front. For a second I thought it might be an olive branch, some clumsy attempt at apology. Then I opened it. Inside were legal documents demanding that I surrender 40% of my income each month to the Whitcomb Family Fund. My eyes skimmed the lines, incredulous. There was even a signature at the bottom, my own, supposedly agreeing. But I knew my handwriting, and this wasn't it. The loops were too wide, the strokes too heavy. Then I saw it the same flourish Aunt Katrina used whenever she signed birthday cards. She hadn't even bothered to disguise it. I laughed, but it wasn't humor, it was disbelief sharp enough to cut. They had forged my consent, dressed it up in legalese, and shoved it at me like I'd be too naive to question it. I scanned the documents, attached them to an email, and forwarded everything to my lawyer. Her reply came within the hour. This isn't just fake, it's criminal. Bring them in, and we'll take it from there. So I did. Sitting in her office, I placed the pages on her desk, and she shook her head with a wry smile. They've handed you their guilt in writing. This is textbook forgery. And if they used your personal information to draft it, identity theft. By evening, I was at the police station, filing a report I never thought I'd file against my own blood. The officer's pen scratched across the form while my voice stayed steady, recounting every detail. When I stepped back into the night air, the weight in my chest felt different, not lighter, not heavier, but sharper. The kind of weight that made it impossible to pretend anymore. And as I walked to my car, I knew the family's silence wouldn't last much longer. It didn't take long for word to spread. By the end of the week, Lorraine and Marlon had been questioned by the police. The family's fortress, the one they'd built on fear and control, suddenly had cracks visible to everyone. The next time I saw them, the atmosphere was different. The confidence was gone, replaced with panic. Janelle, who once mocked me, now turned her sharp tongue on Aunt Katrina. I never signed up for this, she snapped, waving a copy of the forged papers. Do you realize what you've dragged us into? Katrina flushed red, stammering excuses. Lorraine tried to shush her, but the damage was done. The unity they prided themselves on was unraveling in front of me. Silas sat off to the side, his usual smirk absent. When I stepped outside for air, he followed, his voice low. I told them this would go too far. I told them you wouldn't just roll over. His eyes were tired, his tone stripped of bravado. For a moment, I saw the brother I'd once believed in, the one I used to think would stand beside me. But the truth was harder he hadn't stopped them, not until the consequences came knocking. Watching them all splinter, Janelle's anger, Katrina's shame, Lorraine's denial, Marlon's silence. I realized their so-called unity had never been about love. It had only ever been about control. And once control slipped from their hands, there was nothing left binding them together. The collapse was loud and messy, but it was also a warning. If they were willing to turn on each other, I knew they would soon turn all that fury back on me. The hearings moved faster than I expected. Within weeks, Marlon and Katrina were fined for forgery and fraud. Lorraine's pride, her reputation as the dignified matriarch of Asheville's tight-knit circles, crumbled the moment neighbors learned the truth. The woman who once held every room in her grip now avoided even the grocery store, her name spoken in whispers. I didn't celebrate their downfall. I didn't need to. Justice, in its quiet way, spoke louder than I ever could. Instead, I focused on building something of my own. I signed the lease on a small condo near the River Arts District, sunlight pouring through wide windows that overlooked murals and coffee shops. It wasn't large, but it was mine, paid for with my work, my choices, my freedom. Cassian helped me move, stacking boxes with his steady patience, slipping in small jokes when the silence grew heavy. My friends from work filled the fridge and left notes on the counter. Even Silas showed up one weekend, standing awkwardly in the doorway before asking if I needed shelves assembled. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. Nights were quiet now. I cooked for myself, lit candles on the windowsill, and learned how silence could feel like peace instead of punishment. I thought often about the family meetings, the demands, the way they had tried to twist love into a contract. And then I thought about the people who stood by me without asking for a cent, who respected my no and celebrated my yes. Blood may bind, I realized, but it doesn't define. Respect does. Boundaries do. In the end, is family the people who share your name or the ones who honor your worth?